we have several things we want to talk about today that these gentlemen will be speaking to you about. Areas that we think you need to consider as you're anticipating getting into a warehouse management system. So people, processes, physical environment basically are the things we're going to talk about today. We'll also talk about some critical success factors that each of you have to consider and go into that briefly with you. And then we have these four folks that are speaking. Enrique Aguirre from IFS will start, then Manny Martinez and John Slootmaker. They're all from very different businesses. They've all successfully implemented warehouse management systems with WiSys. And so the whole purpose of this meeting is to have a little, learn from them and see what it is that they can share with us to help everybody improve their operations. So I'm going to turn the phone over at this time to Enrique, and at the end of that we'll go to Manny and then John and Ronald. So Enrique, you're on, and I will hand you the baton here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ann. My name is Enrique Aguirre, and I work for IFS Industries. IFS Industries has 8 different Macola companies. We're all currently running in progression and are in the process of implementing to Macola 10, and that's going to be a 2-year process. In the meantime, we're also implementing a WMS system at most of those facilities. We've completed implementation in the first one in our first facility in Dallas, and we're working on the one in Germany, which I am here today. I realize that when you're planning for a WMS implementation, there are a lot of known challenges, and you probably are the reason why you're implementing them. So for example, if you're looking to improve your inventory accuracy, you may be planning to install a bin system, and to do that you may be planning to relay out your facility or label your existing shelves and bins. Or if you're planning on using wireless systems, you're probably planning on hiring a professional site survey to make sure you have coverage in all your entire warehouse. But what I'd like to focus today is on our people and involving all our people in the process. You will likely find that you will end up involving people in your company who were not originally part of the implementation, and you want to avoid those conversations. So one of the main things is to make sure you communicate internally and you set proper expectations. And in setting the expectations, always work to get the feedback from your people, because they are your most valuable asset. So I'll go ahead and start on a couple of 2 or 3 examples of challenges involving people as part of my implementation that I would like to share with you. For example, never underestimate your people's abilities. For example, in our Dallas facility, we were doing backflushing for our shop floor, and decided to change to issuing our raw material instead for various reasons, mainly because the time between reporting production and the material having been removed from inventory was too long, and often shop orders would be set aside for other projects, and that left us with our inventory really not being hand in hand with our physical inventory. So as part of that process, I approached our material handler, who had been doing that job for over 10 years and had never been asked to use a computer or never been asked to use a handheld device. And in addition, there was a language barrier. So as I approached him with a handheld and explained what we wanted to do, he flatly refused. He said that that was not his job. He had no interest in doing the handheld work. So as I was about to walk away from him, thinking, well, I have to rethink this process, I noticed that he had his cell phone in his pocket. So I asked him about it, and sure enough, it was those Samsung Galaxy smartphones. And I said, well, you know how to use that device? And he said, yeah, of course. I said, well, this isn't any different. So that kind of opened up his negativity. And as we started talking, I explained to him not only what the transactions he had to do, which were very simple. He just had to scan a shop order and press a few buttons and so forth. And I also explained why we were doing this, which brings me to the next question is, the next item is explaining why, explaining to our users why we're making the changes we're making. In this case, Hugo, listening intently to me explaining why we were doing this, pointed out that he was frustrated that oftentimes he would get a shop order to pick the material, and then there was no material in some of the components were missing. So he did not understand why he would be asked to do that when there was not enough material. So and he now understood that there's the inventory in the system, and then there's a physical inventory, and we needed to make sure that both were in sync. So by explaining that to him, that reinforced the importance of him doing that job, and we were able to accomplish our goal. Also, never underestimate the skepticism of people. There are people in every company that firmly believe that what they've done the past 10 years is the only way they can do that work, and there's no other alternative. I'm sure you have people like that in your own companies. But what I found is that these individuals may become your most valuable assets. One thing's for sure, they know exactly how things work today, and that is valuable information when you're trying to improve those processes. So you don't want to go and implement a change that will overlook key components, and the skeptics are the ones who will know all the pitfalls. So if you involve them early in your implementation process, not only will they become your biggest allies, but also your most ardent advocates. So that's what I have for as examples of people being a huge value and asset to our implementation of our WMS system. But I do want to close with managing risk. That's something that sometimes gets overlooked in the process, and you want to make sure that as you're preparing for the new system, that when you do go live, you have a backup plan. So, for example, if you in your current operation always go negative in inventory, and all of a sudden you turn on your bin system, your inventory will no longer be able to go negative, and you want to make sure you plan for that, because that could probably stop you from shipping product. So those are some things like implementing bins or implementing lots, things like that require a lot more transactional input. Make sure you plan for those ahead of time, so that when you do go live, you don't want to be stuck without being able to ship. And I think that's all I have for today, and I thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Enrique. If you would stand by, we'll have questions at the end. So okay. I'll hand the microphone off now, proverbial anyway, or virtually, to Manny Martinez from GPA. Manny, you're on. Manny, if you're muted, you need to unmute.
There we go. There we go. Can you see the screen okay, Ann?
Yes, I can.
Yes, we can see you. Go ahead.
Thank you. So thank you, Ann, for having me. My name is Manny Martinez. I'm with GPA. Looking at a little bit of a slide here that I kind of found appropriate, a template for this presentation today, because I felt that preparing for a WMS is a lot like traveling uphill. There's a lot of work. Sometimes the road can be a little treacherous, but when you get to the summit, it's totally worth it. The gains are absolutely worth the work. So there's a lot of topics that can be considered when discussing implementing WMS. I decided to focus my attention today on two of them. the infrastructure component, and product labeling, mainly because there isn't really a whole lot of data out there on how to go about putting some of those things into production. A little bit about our company. GPA has been around since 1940, and we're a market leader in the sale of specialty substrates to the print market. Substrates are specialty papers, films, vinyls that get printed on and are used at point of sale material. Some of the examples I included here are printing on substrates that can go onto walls, electrically static. You can peel them off, you can reposition them. You've probably seen these at like doctor's offices or bars. Printing on silver foil boards that help pop out a lot of color, mainly again just for point of sale references. We do a lot of ID badges and key cards for hotels. So we're located in 4 states across the U.S. We run Macola ES. We have about 4,000 active SKUs. So some of our challenges before we actually got onto the WMS, where we had no real accurate view of inventory. We had what the system had, inventory level, and then a physical inventory. They were so out of sync with each other. The ordering processes was really fragmented. We never knew where an order was within the system or at what point it was in. And in our physical inventories, we did them at the end of the year, and it often took like 3 days to complete. It was just kind of a mess. So when I talk about infrastructure, I'm speaking about wireless access points, the handheld terminals, the servers that the WMS sits on, etc., to describe the whole environment needed to facilitate communication from the guy standing at the bin right into the integration into your ERP. So my first piece of advice on working in the infrastructure is find a consultant. Partnering up with a good consultant will advise you. A good consultant will actually advise you on site surveys, what type of guns you need. They'll offer valuable services such as staging, warranty support, and advise you on device management software if needed. There's so much information in this environment that it would really take a lot of time to try to get your hands around all of that and to figure out what's best for you. So partner up with someone and bringing them in will save you a lot of time and money. So let me tell you a little bit about a site survey and what are some advantages with bringing someone in and the savings and the way you'll get things right the first time. So depending on the size of your warehouse, the height of the racks, the material on your shelves determines how strong of a signal you need in your warehouse and amount of wireless access points you should be able to install. I don't think anything would be worse than going through a whole project and finding out you don't have the right coverage issues or your guns don't work in a certain area or that the equipment you got wasn't spec'd out properly. So what's a site survey? Site survey basically is, so here's our warehouse. It's about 75,000 square feet. Here's our rack area. Here's our office area. A site survey, what they do is they come in and they'll take a ambient noise level. They'll map the whole warehouse and tell you what kind of noise you have coming into the warehouse from your forklifts, background noise, doors, etc. And all those factors actually, decide in the placement of your guns and tell you, or the wireless access points, where you should put things for the best coverage possible. All of these things are sound and they bounce off radio waves, so there was a lot more in depth than I actually had considered. They also do things like take a look at any other wirelesses that are in your neighborhood or in your area that are bleeding into your environment that would actually prevent or cross-reference some of the signal that you're trying to generate. So by doing all that, what they end up doing is then they come back and they'll tell you where your placements of your access points should be, what kind of hardware that's best for the dimensions and the size of, and considering all that ambient noise and all those variables. And what they end up giving you is something that looks like this. So here's our warehouse, and here's actually with these 4 access points in, what the saturation looks like. We have very little to no weak spots. Matter of fact, we have none, because anything above or below like I believe anything above 85 will give you some problems, and what we're seeing is we have complete saturation everywhere, no problems with the guns. They work extremely well, and there's really no weak spots. Another thing the consultant will help you determine is which kind of guns you should be using. It's handheld terminals. We happen to use an MC9090 gun by Motorola. There's some other options out there. I believe Intermec and Honeywell make a variety of guns. And based on your budget and also based on that infrastructure, will kind of determine, and also based on the needs of your individuals that are actually doing the picking, will tell you which style of guns. They come with triggers, they come without, they come some that you can strap on your forearm, put on your finger, etc. So a consultant will help you with some of those. Another interesting topic that you should probably consider is device management. So we have about 30 guns spread out amongst 4 warehouses, and some of the challenges we face is that sometimes these guns go out, they lose the configuration. What's the best way to kind of to get them back up and running? And configuring a gun from scratch actually probably takes about an hour. With device management software, you're actually able to load images on there, and I can get a a gun that's down, fully functional in probably 3 minutes and put them back into work. The guns will lose their configuration. Sometimes the batteries, the CMOS will wear out, so you'll see some of these things. And again, depending on the amount of guns you have out there, the location of some of these, we can push these images remotely across our network to the other sites, will determine whether or not you should look into a device management software. If you only have limited amount of guns, 4 or 5 warehouse guns, then it may not be advantageous to you. But in our environment, it was recommended. We looked at it, and we were very, very glad that we actually kept with it. The particular solution we use is a Motorola solution. Let's see. So in summary, on the infrastructure and the site survey, why it's important to choose a consultant, I think that they'll help you build a reliable, robust network that'll offer the best coverage possible. It'll get you the right devices for your company. They offer value-added services where they'll configure them for you. They'll provide warranty service. They'll stage them for you. And they'll help you build a device management system that actually lets you put those guns into production, get them up and going quickly. They build all the software for you. So next thing I wanted to talk about briefly is product labeling and barcoding. So some of the questions to consider when you're thinking about barcoding your warehouse. We had no barcodes. We had just the way we used to do it was pretty ancient. We actually would we had printed pages of labels with each item on it sitting, right below the bin where the item would sit. We'd actually peel those off and stick them on. It was crazy. So some of the things that you need to consider is we went from that environment to a completely labeled barcode bin serial lot system with WiSys pretty quickly. And one of the things you have to consider is whether you want to use UPCs or SKUs. What your label requirements are going to look like. What kind of software are you going to use to build those labels and the barcodes? So UPC or SKU. A UPC is probably the most common. Well, the UPC-A is the most common, and it's a 12-digit numeric number. It's assigned to trade items, and they're scannable at point of sales. They stay with items all the time, and they're picked up via retail well everywhere. They usually look like this. I'm sure you've all seen them before. Sorry for the pixelation there, but they're a 12-digit code with a checksum at the back, letting you know you've got the right item. And again, all retail systems use them. So depending on what your business is and what you're going to be doing with your products, are they out? Do you want people to be able to scan them? It's because of that UPC that you're actually able to take those apps on your Droid and iPhones and scan UPCs and pull them up from a general database and get the product information on them. SKUs are a little different. They're not unique, where UPCs are unique. They're not unique. anyone can come up with the exact same SKU. You can have a SKU that someone else right across from you has, and they're usually used just for internal barcoding and inventory, and they're an 8-digit, primarily alphanumeric, and they look a little bit like this. There's some variations on there. You can have numbers, letters, everything in there. So as far as label requirements, our label requirements, we're a paper business. We deal in reams, cartons, skids. There's some variations on that stuff. So you have to figure out what your label requirements are and how you're going to go about creating labels to fit those specifications. So another important aspect is software. There's a lot of out-of-box software that's going to help you build barcodes, or also along with the database, with the pertinent information that goes with your barcodes that are integratable into your database, and that will bring information out onto the labels for you. Some of the most common are Bartender, Bcoder. There's some custom stuff that you can use that requires developers. One of them is Crystal Reports. Because of our complex kind of need for our labels and the data we're putting on there and when we're not putting them in and when we are putting them in, we decided to use Crystal Reports. And we have an in-house database guy that's really good at Crystal Reports. So if you're looking for extreme flexibility in your labels, this is probably the way to go. Another thing to help us, remember, we were going from a no labeling barcoding in our system to complete labeled system, labeled warehouse. What we ended up doing also is we required our vendors to label per our specs. We sent them samples along with their barcodes and their UPCs, and then we also created a portal for vendors that didn't have the expertise or knowledge to barcode. We ran into that a little bit. What I'd like to show you is just a quick demonstration on how we built some of those. So here's a label that we actually built in Crystal Reports. This is the actual development where everything sits. There's logos, there's logic in here that tells you when it's this, do this, turn this on, turn this off. But basically, and here's our database fields that it goes out into our Macola ES system and brings back into the label. What we did is we used this Crystal Report Viewer, and we put this on all the packaging personnel, the material handlers that do all the labeling, and we gave them this interface. And basically what they do is they pop an item in, they scan in or enter a lot number, how many labels. We created this parameterized interface that lets you put in anything you need and then generate a label. So there's what our labels look like. This happens to be a carton label. A carton label, we have, so instead of going back to the printer like I used in an example previously with all this printed material, we created on the fly, but what we asked the printer was, hey, give us just labels, die-cut labels, meaning this particular one is broken up into 2 halves, and it would have printed 2 labels on one sheet, and they peel right off, and you can slap them right onto the boxes and label all your material. So instead of having all this inventory and these pre-built labels, you're building them on the fly as needed. And then one other thing that we did was we got a little bit of pushback from some of our vendors on, well, you know, it's a lot of work, and because what we were requiring is we didn't want our guys to sit there and have to label everything that was coming in. So we went to our vendors with a clear-cut focus saying, hey, we want you to label for us, and this is how they should look. You know, we're doing a lot of business with you, so they come through the door, they're perfectly fine. And we got a little bit of pushback. Some of our vendors are actually really good about it, and they had to, you know, it wasn't like we were asking something crazy. They've seen these requests before, so they were able to do them. Some of our smaller vendors actually had some hard time with it, and so what we decided to do was create a portal through the web where they can log in and find and get this information themselves. All they have to do now is just get the paper. And so here's what the portal kind of looks like for a vendor out there, and they can pick what are they building, reams, cartons. They can pick the item. They can enter their lot number. Looks pretty familiar, just like the last one. How many labels? They run a PDF, open it up, and there's the reams, put all of our information in it. They have this paper already pre-cut. We gave them the specs on it, and now all they have to do is just peel it and stick it on. So that helped tremendously. Actually, there's nothing that comes through the door now that is not labeled in our environment, and that helps us always maintain, clear-cut accuracy in our inventory and our labels, and we just know where everything's at all the time. So, summary, what this ended up, what implementing WiSys WMS happened, what it did for us. It gave us a fully labeled warehouse where we're able to accurately know where our inventory was on a bin lot level across 4 different warehouses, and a flexibility response to customer requests. And that resulted in us being able to, over a 2-year period, we reduced our inventory by $1 million. Remember that physical count problem of 3 days? Our cycle counts are done in waves, meaning every week a row or 2 are hit at every warehouse. And it resulted at the last audit, industry average is a 1.5% accuracy variable. That's okay with most auditors. We had a 0.045, so less than 0.5%. Now you turn that into dollars and you see some real results. We sit on $10 million worth of inventory now, and at 1.5, that's roughly, what, $150,000 versus now a 0.045% discrepancy is $45,000. So there's $105K there just saved just in our inventory and our accuracy. So it was well worth the implementation, and we reached the summit relatively unscathed. That's all I have, Ann.
That's great, Manny. The visual is really nice. Thank you very much. That was just awesome. Stand by for some questions, and we're going to turn the microphone over next to the folks from ChemAid. And John, am I giving it to you then, I guess?
Yes.
I will turn it over to
Thank
Mr.
you.
Slootmaker.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you.
John Slootmaker and Ronald Cortez.
Yes, I'm John Slootmaker. I'm with ChemAid Labs. I'm here also with Ronald Cortez with ChemAid. Thank you for joining us today. We've come across 2 parts that we've gone through already, and the part that we're going to touch on a little bit here is critical success factors. And these are just different things that we learned during our implementations, and it's really an ongoing thing here at ChemAid as we develop more and roll more things out. The key thing that you want to make sure of is that you involve your people. I think Enrique had that on one of his first slides. It's really about the people, and that's a true statement. Originally, we went in with the attitude that we were just going to implement and hand off to our people a warehouse management system, and we learned very quickly that was the wrong approach to take. And what we did was we basically went into a basic project management mode, which is made up of 5 steps. The first is basically a startup. You want to make sure your key activities in there are documentation. It's very key as we go along through this whole thing. And you want to confirm the scope of your project. You really want to fully define the project before you get anything rolling. And to do that, you're going to need your sponsors, which is your upper management who's driving the project. You're going to need SMEs, which are subject matter experts. That could be outside consulting. That could be some internal IT staff who really know how to manipulate and deal with the data. But the key thing here is your stakeholders. Your stakeholders are your end users, the people who you're developing the WMS system for. And it's not just for a warehouse. I mean, WMS system affects purchasing, affects planning, sales. I mean, it really involves the whole company. So you really need to have key players involved from each one of those departments, and make sure that you listen very good to their input. You want to draft a high-level plan, and this is all part of your startup. Step number 2 in here is you want to define your scope and requirements. What do people, in the end, expect to get out of this? What do they want to see? You can't give them something and You can't define the scope for them. They have to come back and define what requirements would help each one of their departments. So you want to confirm with them, you know, a baseline project scope. You want to define and again document business and technical requirements. You want to identify also any impact on business processes and identify, you know, anything else that could be that currently is not in the scope. The third thing to consider is your tracking and control. To develop a plan and secure resources. Of course, you have to have the plan and you have the resources before you can do all of this. So when we initially started out, I mean, we were shooting for the moon. We wanted, you know, a little bit of everything, but then we realized we had to scale down, you know, for budgetary reasons, and, you know, we did our implementation in various phases, starting with our R&D in our lab, and we moved out from there based within our budget, and it's a lot easier internally to control and to roll out to people. The fourth thing, now moving on, is to track and control, report and review. Some of the key activities involved in that is implement a communication plan. And by that, with each department, you want to hold regular team meetings. In those meetings, you're going to share the progress and status. There's a lot of people today still asking, they'll come to us and ask for, I want this report, and I need it by tomorrow. I need this report. I need it. And from an IT and project management standpoint, it gets frustrating that they don't understand the scope and how much is involved in the development. And as a wise individual told me one time, you know, he had that at his company where they were asking, you know, they need this report, need this report right away. So he got so frustrated that he gave them a report, and within 1 hour they called him and said, this report doesn't work. You know, and this colleague of mine said, oh, you want it to work too? That's going to be another 3 to 4 weeks. So that's how you push back on your people. But part of that is, you know, hold regular team meetings, you know, to share the progress and status, identify and resolve issues, hold formal sponsor updates, you know, let the upper management, they don't need to be in on the day-to-day, but they could use a weekly update of, you know, how the project's going. If you need additional support, that's where you're going to get it from. And you want to monitor and report your status. You know, here's how we're doing, team. And you want to identify and manage issues. Finally, Ronald will take you through the completion and assessment.
So, good afternoon, everybody. There's a couple of key activities in the completion, you know, but what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have everything documented and see as far as your milestone and what you have completed. The training is very, very important. Normally here, when we did our initial go lives on certain phases, we made sure that early that morning we had all the end users in a cafeteria waiting for a 1 hour refresher. So we've done training during the process, and we showed them kind of this is what's going to look like, feel like. And then the morning before, actually the same day that you hand off the applications or handheld guns of the WMS system and start going live, before we did that, we would have a refresher, and we would hand out cheat sheets or documents that would have in a step-by-step display or pictures of how the transactions were done. So they could have it handy and use it during the day, because again, they're just rolling this out and they're just starting to actually scan stuff. At the end of that process, and you know, once the users are already comfortable, you always want to have some SMEs on the floor, troops, you know, to conduct, you know, some reviews, to be there to troubleshoot and be able to serve as a resource to those people in case of any last-minute problems that can be resolved. So once the users are already comfortable, then you want to gather the team again, basically do a review of, how did it go, what went wrong, what could be done better, what we did very well, and how to take it to the next phase of the implementation and transition the support to the IT department and the organization or the next project team that is going to cope with the next phases as possible. See if there are any open items on your project of the implementation, tests, or issues that you need to address. Try to get to the most important ones or the ones that can maybe jeopardize the proper operation of the implementation. And then basically just go out for lunch or dinner and celebrate that, everything went well. Fortunately, we have done a couple of go-live sessions. We started, as John said, we did it in phases. We started with quality assurance and lab as far as how we handled our lots and how we approved material. That was, one session. And then we turned on shop floor control and we started scanning finished good pallets. So that's been, every time you do these phases and you want to basically reiterate this process and keep track of, the things you did good, what went well, and then keep those things that were issues during that implementation. That way you can make sure you cover them on the next phase. So I want to thank you, and Ann, I'm going to pass it back on to you.
Okay, thanks very much, guys. We have time for some questions. I already have a question for Manny. So Manny, we got a question from Anthony. He'd like to know how your users adapted to using the mobile guns, and he'd like to know about issues and tips to share to help with this, especially back to kind of the issue that Enrique was talking about when people have never used anything like that. So Manny, if you want to answer that question.
Of course. Of course. So the way we were able to kind of interact, we were fortunate enough that we didn't have any, anybody that was very bullheaded or didn't approach this whole process as a game. One of the things that, and Enrique spoke about this, is that the first thing we went after and told these guys is like, what are your troubles? What are your biggest challenges? What frustrates you? And knowing it, we knew the answers ahead of time, and we knew that the guns were going to resolve 95% of those. So we kind of set them up to answer those questions and said, well, here's how you're going to do it better on these guns. Here's what it's going to do for you. Here, it answer all those questions, and slowly start to see everyone kind of nodding their heads and like, okay, just show me how to do it. And we were fortunate enough that we had enough tech-savvy people that were actually okay with it. And what we ended up finding is we grabbed the best of the best and did the kind of the train-the-trainer thing. We had them be the leads for their guys or anyone else. If you have a problem, go see those guys, because if they can talk it out amongst themselves and you've got one particular person that's stronger, it seems like that whole peer society, if this guy's working on it and he's doing it well, then I should be able to do it well. We saw a lot of that. The guns are very intuitive. WiSys does a very good job of, they're big, bold objects that are easily seen and can be worked, and the process is pretty intuitive. What we also did before we went live is we had a good probably 2 to 3 months. We went live in August, about 3 years ago, and in that summer we created a test environment, and in our test environment, all the guns pointed to them. We would just hold classes. We would say, all right, today it's pick day. Here's how you're going to use the pick. And we'd get groups of them together. And remember, during this whole process, you still have to work, right? Business doesn't stop because you're implementing a WMS. And so we did it in chunks. I'd have like a group from 9 to 10 or a group from 2 to 3, and we would break it up like that and say, here's the pick process, here's the purchasing, the receiving process, and by doing it that way, everyone was very open to it. We didn't throw a lot of data at them, but I guess to sum up, the answer is find what their challenges are, make sure the guns are going to address those, and you'll see that you'll get an individual that's like, okay, you're making my life easier. That's good. I like that. So I hope I answered that one.
Good, Manny. Thank you. Enrique, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
No, I think I just like I said, sometimes you will like in my example, I never thought I would get this guy to use the gun, honestly, and today he's a big contributor to the company. He has added responsibilities. Imagine this person did the same job for 10 years, and all of a sudden he's doing other jobs. So it's a very small example, but it says a lot.
Okay, good. We have such a large number of people on the phones that they are muted, so if you have questions, you'll need to use the little go to meeting question area, and I see that some people are sending in some questions. A couple of people have asked, we are recording the webinar, and we will be able to send the PowerPoint to you. We also have some more detailed handouts that we can send out as well. So if you would like us to do that, we just need to know who you are, and we can email the presentation materials to you. Are there other questions that people have right now? Bob, do you want to say something about materials that people use for their labels themselves? Mr. Hawk, unmute yourself, speak.
That's always a task, to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Hi, from the sales desk, I hear a lot of questions from time to time about what kind of barcode labels should we put on the shelf, how big they should be, what they should be made out of. Could any of the panelists or contributors here maybe speak to that, how they went about deciding the size and the placement where they should go on the racks?
Well, Bob, this is John at ChemAid with Ronald. I know we originally started with we had bartender, segued into crystal, but then through WiSys and through some of our requirements here, because we deal with a lot of chemicals, we were required to implement pictograms, which gives you your hazardous material triangle, and the only piece of software that was compatible that we found was Nice Label, which does a fabulous job for us. I mean, the labels that we have coming out now, whether it be for the production of a final finished good product, all have pictograms on, so the person that's handling that material knows how to handle it properly, whether they need protective gear or clothing or, eye protection. So right now, the top of the line that we're looking at, I mean, that we use every day now is a Nice Label.
That is correct.
Hi, this is Manny.
And how about the size? How about the actual size of the label that you maybe put on the shelf so that you can scan it from a forklift? Or I know that labels can come.
We use a 4x4.
4x4, okay.
4x4, and they're a direct thermal labels.
Mm-hmm. And is that a special material so it resists damage or highly reflective? I hear those words sometimes.
We do have waterproof labels that we use a lot of in our laboratories and research and development, where sometimes different chemicals may mix, or we found we didn't use certain waterproof protective labels that a regular, the cheapest label that you could buy that's direct thermal would smudge. So, it's well worth, putting an additional penny and a half into a quality label.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Hey, Bob?
Yes.
It's Manny. In our case, reams, cartons, labels, we actually took our cartons, measured them with a ruler, figured out how big they were, and then designed our label to make sure they they fit that carton. And we did that for the reams, and then, skids are just full page sizes, but sometimes it may take just getting into there and measuring what it's going on and then designing your label appropriately. And then obviously whether you're going to need UV coating or, like John said, some waterproof coating, depending on the item. So measurement, old-fashioned way.
Mm-hmm. Good. That's a good one. Thank you. Thanks, Manny.
Bob, this is Ann again. I know we've had some people that use long-range scanners, and they have sometimes have bin labels that even hang from the ceiling. And I've heard it discussed that there are people that need to mark lanes, and so they have barcodes even on the floor possibly that have to have coating so that those are not obscured eventually. So there's a variety of things that can be done. Who else has questions? If you have questions, type them into the little question area for GoToMeeting. I don't see that we have others. I do have one more document that I want to share with people, and it's a basic guide that we've developed that just asks you to consider some questions to look at when you're making basic decisions about your warehouse management. So one of the things you have to look at is a flow chart that I have up on the screen now about whether you're using lot numbers in Macola, whether you're using bins in Macola. The next question is about labels and confirmed shipping. So this is one of the handouts we have that we can send to you and just help you as you consider through the various options that you have to track inventory better. So we'll send this out to folks that are interested. We do have another question now from Jeremy. He's asking about average prices for the guns. Bob, do you want to talk about some of the options there in terms of the scanners?
Usually we have customers plan for about $2,500 a gun, but if you search the internet, you'll find that the prices are different. But usually the number that we recommend is a grossed up number so that it includes the scanner itself, maybe an extra battery, and a charging station. Manny, maybe you and Enrique and John and Ronald, where do you find, not where do you get your guns per se, but what price range do you find your guns in for? And by the way, Manny mentioned there's other guns. WiSys supports the Motorola series, the 9190, the 9290 series. So I just wanted to mention that. What kind of numbers are you guys budgeting for guns in the warehouse?
This is John. We use the MC9090Gs. We're starting to roll into some MC9091s down the road, but I probably pay anywhere from $1,100 to $1,300, and that includes battery. Because they're internal, I have additional batteries in-house here already, and I do have like a there's maybe 5 four-way chargers throughout our facility. But for a gun and a battery, it's probably, I'd say the max I would pay is $1,300 right now.
I got a question for you, John. It's Manny. Are those new? Or refurbs? It's basically,
well, they're new, but they're outdated right now. If you need a contact, give me a call later.
Yeah, because on the new market, because the 9090s are out of life now. So
exactly.
So I think what we're seeing is if you're going brand new, not out of market, not out of life, but current, like the 92s, you're going to run into what we're seeing is the 18 to about 2100 with everything included, including, if you throw a 3-year Motorola, what is that called, the bronze or the support package on them.
Right.
On a brand new, up-to-date, not out of market gun, 2100 at the most with peripherals and warranty support.
I think another thing to mention is the Motorola company has sunset and have stopped producing the 9090, and the 9090 does have issues with newer operating systems in terms of the security certificate can only go up to 128-bit encryption. The newer guns support 256. So if you have older guns or you're buying refurbs and you're doing some system upgrading, make sure you pay attention to that. We have some documents on our website to help you, so you make sure you don't end up with a bunch of door stops as bricks.
You may be able to take advantage of trade-ins on those as well.
That's a good point. Well, we've come up about 50 minutes here, Ann. Are there any other questions?
We had a question from Anthony about the 9200 series and if we had people using it, and we do. We have people using the 9100s, the 9090s, and the 9200s right now with WiSys. Any other questions? If not, I really want to thank the panelists. They did a great job talking about lots of different variables here. Email me or give me a phone call if you want some of the handouts. And again, we have this recorded, and we have the little PowerPoint, which didn't have too much on it, and a couple of other documents to share if you'd like it. But thank you very much. We had great attendance and wonderful speakers. I really appreciate Enrique chiming in from Germany. That was really nice of him. So thanks, everybody. I guess we'll close the call if we're done.